Hi, Babushka. It's time for the other mothers, the side stories of these wonderful women in my life and in your grandmother Sarah's life from back in the day. I've been thinking about this one for a long time, and I've been told by some young people that I've told these stories to, excuse me, that it's important for these things to come out. But with a lot of stuff in history, things are in pieces, like a puzzle or a crazy quilt. In this situation, it was kind of like a web in a way. We're going to start with the first of these mothers, part of the Outlaw mothers. And the special thing about these mothers is they each had a loving daughter. And this daughter of this mom, her name was Astella. Wonderful woman. Last name Torres. A lot of people think that's associated with the bull, but it's not. It means tower. And her youngest daughter, Magdelene, we called her Maddie for short. Magdalena. She lived across the street from me, a year older than me, and we shared the same birthday. My best friend. Now, her mom, Astella, became very close friends with your great-grandma Sarah. Her oldest son, there were 3 sons and 1 older daughter. But her oldest son ended up marrying a cousin of ours who was the mayor of the town's oldest daughter. Real important to do. This was back in the mid to late 70s, and it was one of the first of the interracial marriages between my cousins, who are all intermixed with different things, as I was explaining earlier in other episodes, but also with the Mexican Americans. And the oldest son, beautiful man, heart of gold, he ended up becoming a police officer. Important stuff. And they had a real history. Oh, where do I begin with this one? Because it's so good and it has so much detail. They pioneered from back in the day, from Texas, right during and after, as there was a lot of calamity of the Spanish-American War. They trekked it up, and I remember Maddie's mama Stella had a portrait of her grandmother in her bedroom. Light-skinned woman, maybe a little German or Celtic, I don't remember, but I thought it was beautiful, mixed with the Mexican, the Native American there. And she's dressed, she's a nurse during that war, and she's dressed in the nurse's uniform from that time, around 1900 or so. And in the background are soldiers with a cannon or 2. Many soldiers with their armor and their large sombreros on. Beautiful, beautiful portrait. Oh my God, incredible. So they had a heritage. Now, the Torreses, they were a good family, and the father, Maddie's dad, Abel, he used to be a manager. He started as a worker, but he became a manager for my dad, John, your grandfather, when your grandfather was a hop and strawberry farmer. And Dad trusted him more than he trusted his own brother, because ironically, right next door to them was my uncle, your grandfather's younger brother. I was allowed to play over at the Torres' house, but not at the other Williams' house. No way. Because my uncle worked for my dad back in the farming stuff and cheated my dad with money. So they had a fight about money. That whole time, we were never allowed to associate with my uncle or his children. But Maddie could. She'd go over there all the time. And she was a wonderful friend. We were both Capricorn. And Astella babysat me and trusted my mom, and my mom trusted her. They were like this. Beautiful people. Now, Astella could not speak a lot of English. I learned a lot of cuss words, though. She'd always be cussing while she'd be cleaning her house, trying to get it all done in time so she could take a nap later on. But I did know things like no sé, which means I don't know, and aquí voy, which means I'm coming. She had Leo tendencies, but I don't remember her sign. A lot of these people I had to just separate from later on, when I learned that in order to heal, I had to separate from a lot of the members of the family, as you well know, and you agree with me in this. And that's great. I'm glad we see that. But Maddie and I, we had wonderful adventures together. We would play all the time, and there was a group of relatives of mine who became friends of hers when we were really little, and we'd ride our bikes all over the joint. And behind her house, so this is her backyard, besides her mom's rose bushes everywhere and the peach tree in their backyard, but right behind that was the huge rodeo stadium. And we were small enough and skinny enough to sneak in and run around and play. Absolutely fantastic. We would also see the animals that would be put underneath the ramp in their little stalls before the rodeo would happen. And that's when I realized at a young age that I didn't want to get involved in the 4-H or any of that Western stuff. I had kind of a fear of horses. Plus, I would see the burn marks from the branding and the whip marks too on a lot of the Brahma bulls and those horses. But we would look at them and admire them, and we would play and play and play for hours and come up with ideas. Now, a lot of people criticize Capricorns. I don't know why. I don't really get involved in that stuff. But there's something kind of weird about when they say Capricorns, once you trust one and they trust you, it's for life, unless you do something really crappy, and then it all goes to hell. But the mythology behind Capricorn is the horn of plenty. And then you have the nymph Almathea, that is the Capricorn goat. Half goat, half fish. She was hired, like in the story of Moses from the Old Testament of the Bible, to take care of the baby Zeus before his father, Kronos, was going to swallow him whole like he did with all the other siblings of the Titans. So the mom gave the father a swaddled up rock like this to swallow. The father thought it was a baby. And then the mom sneakily sent off Zeus on a remote island for Almathea to nurse and take care of, surrounded by soldiers that had shields with little rattles on them. And when the baby would cry, the soldiers were known to shield so no one could see the baby and the Capricorn goat, and they would silently and quietly shake their shields to lull the baby to sleep, and continued doing that and kept Zeus incognito till he came of age, and so he could go back and confront his father. When he did, Kronos had to cough it all up, coughed up all the children who were the Titans. That's an amazing story. And so Almathea was sacrificed, and her horn of plenty, everlasting gifts. And some people associate that with part of Christmas. I don't know. But it's funny how Maddie and I would play, because we would gift to everybody, and we gift to ourselves and make each other laugh. The first and only time, you never met Astella, but the first and only time you met Maddie and you met her older daughter was back in 1996 at my wedding. And I did send her an invitation. It was a fluke, because I hadn't talked to her in years, since I had moved away from Humbleton. I had to get away from all of that environment. And she wanted to be around the more popular, white girls, and kind of move up the ladder, because she ended up becoming a teacher, going to a college that's a teaching college called WU, Western Oregon State College. But she wanted to hang out with the more refined cousins of mine, which was okay, because I ended up making other friends. But when we were little, God, would we play, And my dad didn't like it for some reason. He'd always bitch and swear and cuss and rant. And in our old house, you could actually hear him yelling outside sometimes. And it really grieved me that they could hear that. But they ignored it, They just kind of let him do what he had to do, and who cared? But I thought it was sad, though, because Abel, back in the day, was such a good employee. That man, totally opposite of my father. He'd come home every day. There'd be a thick-ass Bible, all written in Spanish. And instead of reading the newspaper, he'd turn on the TV, he'd be reading the Bible. And then I asked Maddie one day, what happens when he finishes it? She goes, oh, he just starts all over again. And that's how he dealt with stress, that's how he meditated. They didn't really go to church much, but they had a lot of faith, And they had to pinch and scrape and earn everything that they had. And then that way their children could have a better life. And that's what happened eventually. Now, her brothers didn't really like my brothers that much. They tried to tolerate him. But whenever I was over there, I was fed and welcome. Eventually, babysitting, no, it was just going over to visit. And I love to watch Maddie's mom make her quilts, because she did the wonderful southern applique quilts of bright colors, oftentimes scrap fabric, or she'd cut up old clothes, but she made some real work of art. She taught me not only the precision of putting the pieces together, but how to elaborate on top. So a project I'm almost done with, but I had to set it aside. She taught me how to fine-tune stuff like this. And that's a real gift, because I've applied it also in clothes. Like when you were growing up as a little girl. That's a good thing. And she taught me the value of taking something old and making it new again, you know, and giving it a little bit of chutzpah. But we have to go into this. Again, very important, because a lot of it has to do with a book written back in the day by the brother of the mayor of the town. Now, Maddie always thought it was odd because I was such a tomboy and I wasn't anything special. I didn't really want to stand out. I wanted to just be left alone and kind of hide and be weird in my own way. Let's be the little reptilian, the little turtle. But for some reason, one day during school, we were told to go across from the school as a class. Actually, I think there was more than one class. There were news reporters over by the Knights of Columbus building. This is also near a huge cross where there's a grave, and it's known that the only Civil War soldier west of the Mississippi is buried at that spot. So, I'm in between these two men, these relatives of mine, and I'm chosen, and I do not know why. I have the photo, but it's a little thin and faded. It's out of a newspaper. It was in all the major papers at that time, and it's also in the archives. I was about 8 years old. But I'm in between the man who wrote this book and his brother. They really wanted to get Humbleton out on the map. Really important stuff. Here, babushka. Actually, since there's some scary stuff up here, I'm just going to set you away for a while. But there were cousins. I remember one show and tell where a girl who was like a third cousin, she was the granddaughter of this mayor, and the mayor's youngest daughter was also in my class. So you had two girls, and one's the aunt of the other, and we're in the same class. And I was the odd man out, and that's great because the two would fight all the time. But the granddaughter of this mayor actually brought the magazine National Geographic in one day and showed pictures in the magazine of some of the cousins on their horses. Beautiful portrait pictures, you know. They really wanted that area to be popularized and established. They really wanted to get their foot in, and were part of a lot of branches affiliated with the Oregon Historical Society. But those girls didn't like me because I had happened to be chosen. I don't know why. I had hand-me-down tough skin jeans on and tennis shoes, you know, and a little biker jacket on. I didn't have on a nice dress like them. But they were jealous of me that I ended up in that photo. But Maddie was proud of me, you know, and she would tease me about it, as she would tease me about everything else about me, you know, that I have the squeakiest voice of everybody, and I would hide everywhere. And when I would laugh, I would hide my face and shake a lot. One of her nicknames for me was Shake and Bake, which is really funny. Funny as hell. But Mom was very close to that family. And I told you in the last episode about your grandmother, Sarah, about blowing a whistle and all those field women approaching Mom with concerns about their children. And it happened to do with the mayor of the town. They talk about pizza. They talk about missing or violated children. I don't know if any were missing, but people were sure as hell pissed off. So when I think about it, I think of yummy tacos. You know, monsters who want those things, which to me, you know, disgusting. And my mom was in shock. She didn't know what to do, but she did know what to do. She did it through the law. And it was so sad. I didn't even know about this, but I remember playing with Maddie as a child and having kind of an instinct of who to stay away from, who was safe, who was not, who were my mentors, male or female, didn't matter. But that guy, I hated him. He ran the post office with his wife in the middle of town. And in order to head over to the store from my house, and Maddie and I used to do that all the time. We'd collect bottles and cans, turn them in at the store to get penny candy and stuff like that. But oftentimes, I would want to avoid walking by the post office. And she's like, "Oh, what is wrong with you? You're just crazy." I don't know. And then if I would walk by there by myself, I'd see him staring through the window. I'd see his wife too. I had nothing against their youngest daughter. I thought she was a wonderful, nice girl. In fact, something in me kind of felt sorry for her. I don't know why. But I remember having candy wrappers and ice cream wrappers, you know, or pop cans. When I'd walk by his post office, oh girl, I would throw the garbage into the post office drop. I don't know, something in my head just hated him. I wanted to throw that stuff at him. I don't know why. And I remember getting in trouble for that later on. But I never regretted it, because I kept doing it. When Mom blew that silent whistle, she did it with some tact. Astella, her friend, Maddie, Abel, the dad. The other brothers did not know of that family. Neither did the oldest sister. Mom went to the oldest son, as he was a cop. He had earned a lot of seniority, and he was living near and working over in the town of Burnside. And that's where Mom and I eventually ended up. She told him everything. And I guess it took him some time to do some research on it and to connect all the dots. Don't think he told his authorities. Thing is, when you're dealing with an area that has a reputation, I couldn't even imagine what was going through his head or his heart. because he loved his wife very much. They had 2 young daughters, relatives, you know. He told some of the other men in the town. I actually found this out later. We're going to go further into the future, around 1986 or 87, when Mom and I were living in Burnside. And I'll give you more details about that later, about what we went through over there. But one day, Eddie, my brother, comes barging into the house that Mom and I were living at the time, after we moved away. He's rumming through the refrigerator when we're short on food, asking Mom for money when we're short on money, and I'm having to work at least part-time on the side while going to school to try and keep things going. His mom had a lot of medical bills. But Eddie was screaming and hollering, you know, calling out to Mom, Did you know that the mayor was violating children? And Mom was acting as if she was in shock. She didn't know about it. I didn't know about it. And so Eddie is telling her the story that the men in the town, not all of them, but some of them, God, it's like an episode of Twin Peaks. They handled it. They handled it within the town under their own law. I don't know what they did to that man, but he never left his house. Ever. After that occurred. And he had to step down from his position. It was given to somebody else, an outsider, who had moved into the town. And that's fine. So they're having the conversation about it while I'm sitting there trying to get my homework done and wanting my brother to leave, because I hated his guts, thought he was an asshole, never felt safe around him. Eventually he left. Mom and I would have serious conversations, especially after her heart attack. It's like she wanted to spill things out to me. Maybe she knew her time was coming. I don't know. Maybe it was therapy for her. You know, kind of a confessional. But sometimes, especially if I wasn't working and I had a free night away from school and stuff, maybe in the summertime, we would be up all night long talking, just having tea or apple cider. And she would tell me all this stuff. But we sat down that night and she told me all about it. And I asked her why. And she's like, you know, I had to do something. Because if I wasn't going to step up to the plate and hit the ball in this, it was going to continue. And all these families whose children were hurt, even though it was during the Reaganomic era where all immigrants in the United States were given amnesty. That's some serious juju right there. They were still afraid because oftentimes they were working in the fields or doing minimum wage jobs in various places. They were afraid if they went to the real authorities, they might get in trouble if there's an investigation. And then what? If some of the children that they helped out within their community, if the social workers got involved, the children might be taken away. And that might scar them even more. You know? I never told Maddie. And that's unfortunate. Her and I hung out a couple of times. She would actually reach out to me, and sometimes she would call my mom. I remember one time in Burnside around 1986, because the other white girls didn't want to go with her on this. She had to be real quiet about it, but her family was all for it. There was a visit by Jesse Jackson in that town, giving a talk, and he brought along the Rainbow Coalition. Mom wanted me to go. I wanted to go too, because I hadn't really talked to her in a while, and still considered her one of the best friends I had ever had. And we went together. And I remember at the end of the speech, and it was huge and crowded with reporters everywhere, he was running for president at the time under the Democratic Party. He approached Maddie and gave her a hug, and Maddie got some photos. He didn't hug me though, and I was cool with that. I didn't really understand why. I figured out later on it was probably a class issue. And I'm more of a Malcolm X fan anyways, so. And there's a difference right there if you really read between the lines. They don't talk about it in regular history books, you know, or the media. A lot of stuff's hidden. But it was no problem. It was a really good experience. But I did sense a lot of danger in that town. Oh, here's a great story. I almost forgot about this because I've been thinking about it. The side of the house, on the other side of my uncle, of Maddie's house, there was also an old guy who lived in a very gray, dilapidated house. And I remember he had the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen. He'd always be wearing either blue and white stripe or gray overalls and a farming cap. He lived there alone. His name was Cecil. He would bother the Torres family a lot. I had only seen a couple of confrontations. He didn't like them. I think he was racist. One time, while Astella was watering her garden, it's summertime, and Maddie and I are out playing. She had a little puppy named Oso, which means bear, which is so funny because that dog was so small, was not a bear, and was a girl who ended up having puppies. But that old creepy guy got into a confrontation with Astella as she's watering the garden because the water kind of got close to his side. And he threw an apple and it pegged Maddie in the head right on the temple. She started to cry. But Astella, rather than being confrontational, she was peaceful about it and just consoled her daughter and brought both of us into the house. And then there was another time, you know, people talk about these RH negative moments and sensing something in the air. I don't know, a vibration, I don't know what to call it. But Maddie and I would oftentimes play. She had chickens. she had a pet chick. Didn't realize this chick was going to become a rooster till we saw the plume growing on his head. She was afraid when that rooster would grow up that her dad would chop off its head and cook it. So you know what she did? She named that little chick who grew up to be a rooster. And one of, you know, her pets, she named him after her father. She named the rooster Abel. Because she knew, she's like, I know if this pet has my dad's name, he's going to feel sympathy and leave him alone. And it worked. But we would play with all these little animals, and we'd play with bugs and make mud pies. we would play Bible stories together. And she did not criticize me like the rest of my cousins would tease me. I was really serious into praying the rosary. I would play it almost every day, and oftentimes I'd have it in my pocket. But she didn't criticize me for doing that. We would play Bible stories together. She would be Mary, and I would be Elizabeth. And then we would play house, and it would always piss me off because she'd always be able, you know, as the oldest Capricorn, to be the dad, and I'd have to be the mom. But we worked it out. One time we were playing house. Creepiest moment of my life. We were on the side of her house, which was bright yellow, white trim. We were in the rose bushes against the house. Red and white roses in bloom. Surrounded by belladonna weeds, the ones that her mom couldn't get to in time to pull out because those are yucky weeds and very poisonous. The berries are horrible. And then a little bit of ivy climbing alongside the house. It was great. It was like a shelter or a playhouse with all these leaves. But that old guy is coming out. He's near his apple tree of yellow apples. And his eyes were just wild, almost like a serpent. We saw him scanning the area, and we were hidden away enough where he couldn't see us. And we looked at each other. I looked at her. She looked at me. And we were like, in the quietest whisper ever, we're like, we don't talk. He was holding a sickle, and he was cutting the apples with the sickle, picking them that way. For maybe an hour or two he was out there, and we kept quiet. Just a moment of fear. I don't know. And that fear I felt around other areas of the town. I don't know what it was. Something really creepy. I've talked to people now, today, associated with some people, and some have actually reached out to me. Some of them have heard stories about not wanting to go near that place. It's very odd because it is a tourist attraction and strangers visit all the time. But just bizarre stuff. We waited, it seemed like forever, for that man to go away. And at first she did want to get up and move, but I grabbed her hand. This little turtle grabbed her hand. I said, no. She's like, real quiet. I have to go pee. I'm like, well, if we end up peeing our pants, at least we'll be quiet about it. We're not going nowhere. I don't know what else to say. But that girl and her mom, God bless her, wonderful, wonderful people. And how that scandal must have affected them. Everybody acted like nothing happened, really. But you don't know what was going on underneath. So when Maddie visited me at my wedding, and we're laughing and holding hands and crying at the same time, and you're there playing around with her daughter, you're about the same age, 4-year-old girls in a church having the time of their lives. She was crying, saying, I miss you so much. Been wondering what's been going on with you. And I had to tell her very quietly, while I had some of my relatives walking around, then wondering in the back of my mind, was this the right decision? Happy bride. But I had to explain to her that I just don't want to go down there no more. I tried. I tried throughout my marriage, but I just couldn't do it. And I discovered in the past 10 to 15 years that I had suffered through some PTSD. I think in my childhood, my instincts were kind of, the volume was turned up as a protective measure of that whole area. I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy. I'm just saying. But we did have some good memories together, and I'll never forget her. I hear she's doing okay. You know, she ended up with her husband. He came from Mexico. She ended up marrying him. And how they're trying to pass policies and laws today. Him and her are at risk. She was born here. But what about her husband? You know? It doesn't make any damn sense. Or their children. And you know the Northwest Detention Center is right nearby me. It's huge. Big jail for immigrants. Not only do they jail Mexicans, but also white Canadians. I know a minister from Laos because I protested there a couple of times about 10 years ago. He protests there every Saturday with a group of people because during the Bush administration, Bush had hired or allowed the company of Boeing to bring over engineers from Laos and other parts of Asia to work for the Boeing company. And it was a way of keeping their costs down too. Gave them all working visas and then a promise, a contract, saying you can earn your citizenship and we will help you. Yeah, right. One day, that building that they were all working in, and by the way, they didn't get paid as much as the other engineers at Boeing, but one day they got raided by ICE and got thrown into the Northwest Detention Center. And you know ICE or the police, but especially ICE, the government pays these people $500 a head for each person they put in that place. And here's another fact. This is a trip. Bet you didn't know this. Maybe I told you briefly, but if you weren't paying attention at the time, that's okay. But this is an absolute fact. I learned this from students at Seattle University in the School of Law. They put together a book. It's not published yet, but it is on record, of all the laws that the government and that GEO, who owns the Northwest Detention Center, break according to the original laws for the state of Washington and also for the United States. Pick that one apart and argue it in court. And laws can be changed, but you have to go through this other web and maze. Another fact about the Northwest Detention Center, and there's another detention center in Texas too. They are owned by the company GEO. And guess what else GEO owns and runs? The jail at Guantanamo Bay. Ain't that a trip? Maybe someday I'll talk to Maddie. Astella, her mom, is no longer with us, and she's probably in a better place. But it'd be an interesting thing for her and I to talk about all the things that we've gone through over the years. So, and she loved you when you were a little girl. Anyways, I think that's all I gotta say. So, I better get going here. And, oops, I set it down on the ground. If you have any questions about any of this, you know how to reach me. And don't forget to ring the bell. Goodbye.